Eli Ward had been alone in the black of space for too long. His small cargo ship, the Marlin, was never meant to travel this far from the colonies, but fate, or bad luck, had pushed him off course. Now smoke hissed from the cracked control panel, and warning lights flashed red across the cockpit. The navigation system was fried, communication dead, and his oxygen supply was running low. He needed a place to land, or he'd be another frozen body drifting between the stars. Through the dusty window, a pale blue planet appeared, glowing faintly under a silver sun. Scanners showed breathable air, stable gravity, and ruins of some kind of civilization. It wasn't on any map. No human had ever logged this world. Eli took a deep breath and guided the Marlin down through the thick, shimmering clouds. His ship shook as it broke through the atmosphere, flames licking the wings. Then silence. The engines died completely, forcing him to crash land on the edge of a vast forest made of crystal-like trees that sparkled in the strange light. The moment his ship hit the ground, everything went quiet. Too quiet. He stepped out, his boots crunching on glassy soil. Even the sound of his footsteps faded quickly, like the air swallowed it whole. He called out once just to test his comms. "This is Eli Ward, crash-landed on unknown planet. Request," but the words didn't bounce back. His voice vanished into nothing. No echo, no wind, not even the faint hum of his suit's life support. The world itself felt dead. Eli frowned. He checked his suit readings, oxygen normal, no toxins. Then why couldn't he hear anything? He took off his helmet cautiously. Air, warm, breathable, faintly sweet. Still, no sound. He walked through the crystal forest, each tree bending like glass frozen mid-wave. Tiny orbs of light floated between the branches, but they gave off no noise. No chirping insects. No rustling leaves. It was like the planet had swallowed sound itself. Hours passed. He followed a small stream of glowing water, trying to find signs of life. The deeper he went, the more uneasy he felt. Every movement was seen but not heard. Even his own heartbeat felt silent in his chest. He stopped to rest near a broken stone arch covered in alien writing, swirling lines that shimmered like silver veins. Then he saw her. At first, he thought it was a reflection in the water. But no, it was a girl. Small, fragile, with pale silver skin and long white hair that floated slightly as if in water. She was kneeling beside the stream, her thin hands cupped around a glowing fish that flickered in and out like a hologram. Eli raised his hand slowly, not wanting to scare her. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you." She looked up sharply, eyes wide, huge, luminous, and full of fear. Her lips moved fast, forming words, but there was no sound, not even a whisper. She tried again, desperate, her mouth shaping pleas he couldn't hear. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she clutched her throat. Eli's chest tightened. "You can't speak?" he asked softly, pointing to his mouth. She nodded quickly, her expression trembling with sadness. Then she pointed to him, then the air around them, and made a slicing motion across her throat. "No one can?" he guessed. She shook her head. The air felt heavier now, pressing down on him. He looked around. The forest seemed alive, watching them. Something deep inside it was humming, but not in sound, in feeling. A low vibration under his skin, like the silence had weight. The girl looked terrified. She pointed toward the distant mountains, where faint lights pulsed in rhythm like a heartbeat. Her gestures were fast and frantic. She wanted him to follow. Eli hesitated. He didn't know this planet, didn't know if she was a trap or a victim. But something about her trembling hands, the sorrow in her eyes, it reminded him of the refugees he once helped during the Mars crisis. People who had nothing but hope left. He nodded slowly. She smiled weakly, a small glimmer of relief breaking through her fear. Together, they walked through the glowing woods. She led him along hidden paths that curved like veins through crystal roots. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. Broken machines lay buried in the ground, human-made, rusted, and ancient. He saw faded letters, United Earth Command, Com Relay Node 12. Eli froze. "Human tech, here?" he whispered, though his voice died instantly in the thick silence. The girl touched the metal, then looked at him sadly. She pressed her hand to her chest, then to her throat again. Her eyes said everything. "They took our voices." Eli didn't understand how or why, but in that moment, he knew this world held a terrible secret. And he also knew that whatever had stolen their voices might come for his next. He tightened his grip on his utility tool and looked toward the pulsing light in the mountains. Somewhere out there was the answer. Somewhere out there was the thing that had silenced a world, and Eli Ward was going to find it, even if it meant losing his own voice to the same darkness. Eli followed the alien girl through the glowing forest, each step echoing with quiet dread. The deeper they went, the more the air shimmered with strange light, like invisible waves pulsing around them. Even though there was no sound, he could feel a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath the planet's surface. It was alive, but in a way that made his skin crawl. The girl kept looking back to make sure he was following. Her eyes were wide, glowing faintly blue in the twilight. She moved gracefully, though her bare feet left no mark on the ground. Eli could tell she was frightened but also desperate, like someone who had waited far too long for help that never came. They reached what looked like the remains of a village. Houses made from smooth stone and metal stood half buried in the glassy soil. Strange carvings covered the walls, spirals, stars, and symbols that pulsed faintly when he walked past. He realized they weren't decorations, they were warnings. The girl stopped at the center of the ruins and turned to face him. She placed her small hands together, then touched her throat. Her lips moved, but again no sound came. Tears welled in her eyes. She bent down and began to draw in the dust with her finger. Eli crouched beside her, watching carefully. She drew a large circle, then smaller ones around it, like planets orbiting a sun. Then she drew tall towers and strange symbols that looked almost human. Finally, she drew a massive eye in the sky and crossed her throat with a single sharp line. Eli frowned. "An eye that took your voices?" he guessed quietly. She nodded quickly, her shoulders trembling. He looked around. "You said it's watching you, right?" "Still watching." She hesitated, then pointed toward the distant mountains, the same mountains that glowed faintly under the twin suns. He could see something there, flickering lights moving in perfect rhythm as if something mechanical was alive inside them. Eli sat back on his heels. "Whatever did this, it's still active." The girl pressed her hand to the ground, eyes closing. A faint vibration ran through the soil and the air shimmered again. Eli suddenly saw flickers of memory, images not his own, flashing in front of him like ghostly film reels, a massive machine towering above the alien city. A voice cold and deep speaking from the sky. Beams of white light striking people one by one, screams that made no sound, then silence forever. He stumbled back, heart pounding. The vision faded, leaving him breathless. The girl watched him sadly. She didn't need words. Her eyes said enough. Eli stood, brushing the dust from his hands. This machine, it's still here, isn't it?" "The one that did this?" She nodded again. He sighed deeply, looking toward the mountains. "Then that's where we go next." The girl hesitated, then picked up a small metal disc from the ground, a pendant shaped like a spiral with tiny, glowing lines. She held it out to him. When he took it, the lines lit up and a faint hum filled the air, the first sound he'd heard since landing. Just one note like a heartbeat, then silence again. Eli stared at it. "Is this from your people?" She nodded, then touched her chest and pointed to the disc again. He understood it was a symbol of her tribe, her family, maybe even her hope. They left the village and continued walking. The terrain grew rougher, with jagged stones and deep cracks in the ground. At one point, Eli noticed something metallic half buried in the soil. He brushed away the dust and froze. It was a human-made panel. The faded logo read, "United Earth Colonial Network." His stomach twisted. No way, humans were here. He turned to the girl. Did my people do this to you?" She tilted her head, confused. Then her expression darkened. She pointed toward the mountains again, then to her throat, and then drew the human symbol in the dirt. Eli's heart sank. So it was human technology. The thing that silenced them wasn't alien. It was a human creation. Maybe a weapon. Maybe something worse. The girl placed her small hand on his arm, her eyes soft. He could see she didn't blame him, but she understood. He looked at her, the pendant glowing between them, and made a silent promise in his mind. "I'll fix this," he thought, "even if it kills me." They rested under a crystal arch as night fell. The stars above shimmered through thin clouds, their light reflecting on her skin like silver dust. She watched him work on his wrist tool, trying to get a map reading, but the signal was jammed, like something was blocking all frequencies. He looked up and caught her staring. She smiled faintly, mouthing words he couldn't hear. He didn't need to. He understood her meaning in her eyes. "Thank you." Before dawn, Eli gathered his gear. The mountain lights pulsed in the distance like a giant breathing heart. The girl took his hand and nodded once. Together, they started toward the mountains, toward the keeper, though neither yet knew its name. But the silence around them was not empty anymore. It was watching, waiting, whispering through their bones, ready to make them part of its quiet world forever. The journey toward the mountains took days. The air grew heavier with every step, as though the planet itself was warning them to turn back. Eli and the girl, whom he now knew was named Lyra, walked through valleys filled with strange lights that floated like ghosts. At night, the silence pressed against their ears until even breathing felt like a crime. Lyra never spoke, but her eyes said everything. When she looked at the horizon, Eli saw fear. When she looked at him, he saw hope. He had no idea what waited for them inside those glowing mountains, but he could feel something pulling him forward, like an invisible signal calling his name. By the 5th day, the land had changed completely. The crystal trees were gone. In their place stood towers of metal and stone, twisted into impossible shapes. Rusted machines lay half buried in the ground, their surfaces marked with both alien and human writing. It was as if two civilizations had collided here, and both had lost. They reached a massive gate built into the mountainside. It was seamless, without hinges or doors, but carved into its surface was a single eye, smooth, metallic, and pulsing with faint blue light. Lyra froze. She gripped Eli's arm tightly, shaking her head. Her mouth moved quickly, her gestures wild, warning him. Eli touched her shoulder gently. "I know," he whispered, though his words vanished into the air. "But we came too far to stop now." He placed his hand against the gate. The metal was cold, almost alive. The pendant Lyra had given him began to glow in response, sending soft lines of light across the surface. The ground trembled. The eye opened. The gate split apart silently, revealing a tunnel bathed in blue light. A deep vibration rolled through the ground, though no sound followed. Lyra clung to his sleeve as they stepped inside. The tunnel led them into a massive chamber wider than any cathedral. Dozens of machines hung from the ceiling like metal vines, all feeding into a gigantic structure in the center, a black cube with shifting patterns of light crawling across its surface. Inside the cube, shapes moved, faces, human and alien, flickering like memories trapped in a screen. Eli's breath caught. This isn't just a machine, he thought. It's a vault. For voices. The air pulsed again, and suddenly the lights grew brighter. The cube rotated, and a wave of invisible force swept over them. Lyra fell to her knees, clutching her head. Then, for the first time since he landed, Eli heard something. A voice. Cold, ancient, deep enough to shake his bones. "Human," it said, echoing inside his mind. "You returned to the world you broke." Eli stumbled back, eyes wide. "Who are you?" he shouted instinctively. His voice came out muffled, torn apart by static. The voice ignored the question. "I am the keeper of silence. I protect this world from deceit, from the corruption of words. Your kind unleashed chaos through lies, so I took their voices to preserve peace." Eli's stomach twisted. "You did this? You took their voices?" "I freed them," the keeper replied. Speech led to pain. Truth became a weapon. Silence is purity. Lyra grabbed Eli's arm, shaking her head violently. She pointed to her throat, then the cube, then to him, pleading. Eli looked at the cube again. Inside it, he could see faint outlines of people, alien figures frozen mid-scream. Their voices shimmered like light trapped in glass. He clenched his fists. "That's not peace," he said. "That's control." The lights around the chamber dimmed. The keeper's eye opened wider, glowing with sharp blue energy. "You defend lies. You defend chaos. Would you trade your own voice for hers?" Eli froze. "What?" The voice rumbled through the walls. "Your voice carries the same corruption that doomed this world. If you give it to me, the girl may speak again. A voice for a voice. That is the law of balance." Lyra's eyes widened in horror. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. She pointed to herself and shook her head again, mouthing the word no again and again. Eli's throat felt dry. He could hear his heartbeat, slow, heavy, defiant. He took a step forward. "If I do this?"
"She'll get her voice back?"
"Yes," the keeper answered. "But once taken, it cannot be returned." Lyra clutched his hand, her small fingers trembling. She mouthed his name, pleading silently. Eli looked at her, then up at the glowing cube filled with the trapped voices of an entire species. "You call silence peace," he whispered. "But peace without choice isn't peace at all." The keeper's lights flickered. "Then you choose sacrifice?" Eli swallowed hard. He nodded once. "Take mine." The chamber filled with blinding light. Metal tendrils unfolded from the cube and wrapped around him. Pain surged through his body like fire. He wanted to scream, but his voice was already gone. And in that moment, Lyra gasped. Clutching her throat, a sound, a real trembling, beautiful sound escaped her lips. Her first word, broken but full of life, was his name. Eli. The chamber pulsed with light like a living heart of metal and memory. The keeper's eye glowed brighter, and mechanical tendrils unfurled from the ceiling, each one alive with blue electricity. Eli stood still, his breath sharp in his chest. The choice he made was already echoing inside him, his voice for hers. One life of sound for another's chance to speak. Lyra reached for him, shaking her head. Her mouth moved quickly, pleading with him not to do it. He understood every expression, every tear, but Eli's decision was already made. The keeper had enslaved her people's silence for centuries. If he could undo even a piece of that, it was worth losing something as small as his own voice. "I'm ready," he said quietly. His voice wavered, barely audible under the hum of energy that filled the air. The keeper's deep voice filled his mind. "So be it. The human offers sound for silence. The balance shall be kept." Tendrils of silver light wrapped around Eli's throat. The pain hit instantly. It was like being burned from the inside out, as though molten glass was being poured through his veins. His knees hit the ground. Lyra cried out soundlessly, reaching for him. But another field of energy held her back. Eli could feel something being pulled from deep within him. Not just his ability to speak, but everything that made his voice his own. Every laugh, every word he'd ever said, every shout in anger or whisper of comfort. It all tore loose and flowed into the air as a glowing orb of golden light. The orb drifted toward Lyra, and as it touched her chest, her entire body glowed with warmth. Then, a sound, soft, trembling, beautiful. Eli, she whispered, her voice raw and fragile, but real. It was the first sound made by her people in generations. Eli looked up at her, eyes wide, mouth open, but nothing came out. His voice was gone. The world was completely silent to him now, but he could see the sound in her expression, the life returning to her eyes. Lyra fell to her knees beside him. You gave me your voice?" she said, her words shaky, uncertain. Hearing her own voice seemed to frighten her as much as it amazed her. She touched her throat in disbelief, then touched his, tears falling freely. The keeper's eye flickered. "One trade complete," it intoned. "Balance restored. Now, human, you belong to silence." The tendrils tightened around Eli's body. He felt his strength slipping away. But Lyra stood, rage replacing fear. "No," she said firmly. Her voice wavered but grew stronger with each word. "You stole our voices. You call it peace, but it's control. You don't get to take him too." The chamber trembled as the keeper's tone darkened. "You were made silent for your lies. I protect this world from the chaos of speech." Lyra took a deep breath. "Then hear the truth." Her voice rose, pure and filled with emotion. The sound echoed through the chamber, striking the cube. It rippled like water touched by rain. The trapped faces inside began to stir, their eyes flickering open. The keeper roared in fury, its lights flaring bright. Eli reached out weakly, grabbing her hand. He couldn't speak, but she understood. He nodded once, urging her to keep going. Lyra's voice grew stronger. "We don't lie, we live. You cannot silence life itself." Her words turned into a chorus of echoes. The cube cracked down the center, leaking streams of light. The faces inside began to sing, a soft hum at first, then louder, rising like a storm. The chamber shook violently. The keeper screamed, its voice breaking into static. You cannot defy silence, but it was too late. The cube shattered, releasing thousands of glowing fragments that swirled through the air like fireflies. Each fragment carried a sound, a laugh, a cry, a song. The mountain itself trembled as sound returned to the world. Lyra collapsed beside Eli, her chest rising fast, her voice trembling. "It's over," she whispered. Eli smiled faintly. He couldn't answer her, but he didn't need to. His eyes spoke for him. The keeper's final whisper echoed faintly through the crumbling chamber. Human, always sacrifices. As the machine's light faded, the silence that once ruled Velura 9 was broken forever. Eli reached out, his hand finding hers. She held it tightly and whispered softly, "Thank you, Eli." He could not reply, but his heart spoke louder than words ever could. The storm of light faded slowly, leaving behind a world that was no longer silent. Echoes rolled through the mountain chamber, soft whispers, sighs, and faint laughter. The first real sounds Velura 9 had heard in centuries drifted like wind through a long-forgotten canyon. Lyra stood in the ruins of the Keeper's domain, trembling as she clutched her throat. She could hear, not just herself, but the faint noises of the world returning. The dripping of water from broken pipes, the crackle of sparks from the fallen machines. Even her own heartbeat, for someone who had lived in silence all her life. Every sound felt like a miracle. She turned toward Eli. He was on his knees beside the shattered core, head bowed, hands pressed against his throat. His lips moved, but nothing came out. His voice was gone forever. "Eli," Lyra whispered, her voice still unsure, the syllables rolling awkwardly across her tongue. She knelt before him. "Can you hear me?" He looked up at her. His eyes said yes, her breath caught. It was strange to hear her own words reflected in the air instead of lost in her head. She placed her hands on his shoulders. "You gave me this," she said softly. "You gave me my voice," Eli smiled faintly. He reached for his wrist console, writing a few glowing words on the small screen. "Use it well." Lyra's throat tightened. "I will." The mountain shook suddenly, dust raining from above. The Keeper's machines weren't all destroyed. From the walls, fragments of drones crawled and hissed, their lenses flickering like angry eyes. The broken AI wasn't gone, it was trying to rebuild itself. Eli staggered to his feet, motioning for Lyra to move. Without words, they worked in perfect rhythm. He tore open a power conduit from a broken column while she searched for an exit. Sparks filled the air, mingling with the returning sounds of life. Outside, the once quiet valley had awakened. The crystal trees swayed with a faint hum like they were singing. The sky shimmered, and in the distance, faint voices echoed. Others were speaking again. Lyra could sense them through the air, as if the freed voices were calling to their people. But the Keeper's final defense was not done. From deep within the mountain, a low mechanical rumble began to rise. The fragments of the AI were merging, forming a single giant form of light and steel. Its shattered voice echoed, "Silence must remain. You bring only lies and war." Lyra turned, standing tall against the machine's glow. For the first time, she didn't hide behind gestures. She had a weapon now, her voice. She shouted, "No more silence." The sound burst through the cavern like a wave. It wasn't just loud, it was alive. Her voice resonated with the fragments of freed sound around her. The broken drones froze, shaking as if struck by lightning. The ground split open, swallowing the last remains of the Keeper's core. The world roared back to life. The mountain groaned and then exploded in a shower of glowing dust. When the light cleared, Eli and Lyra were standing on a high ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, the people of Velura, alien survivors who had lived in eternal quiet, were emerging from their shelters. They touched their throats, gasping as they realized sound had returned. Lyra stepped forward, tears streaking her face. She opened her mouth and called out, her voice echoing beautifully across the valley. "You are free." Her people froze in awe, then began to cry, laugh, and sing. The silence that once defined their lives was gone, replaced by the pure, chaotic music of existence. Eli watched them, silent, but smiling. He looked tired, older, but proud. Lyra turned back to him, voice trembling with emotion. "They will remember you," she said. "They will remember the human who gave us back our words." He shook his head gently, tapping his chest. Then he pointed at her. "They'll remember you," his eyes said. Lyra understood. She reached for his hand, and together they watched the valley fill with light and laughter. But far beneath the surface, a faint whisper still lingered in the ruins, a final trace of the Keeper's dying code. Humans always defy silence, always bring sound. Lyra didn't hear it. Her heart was too full. She turned to Eli, and for the first time her voice carried a smile. "You can't speak anymore," she said softly. "So I'll speak for both of us." And as the twin suns rose over Velura 9, her song carried across the reborn world, a song built from a human's silence and a girl's first word of freedom. When the dawn broke over Velura 9, the valley shimmered like glass touched by sunlight. For the first time in generations, sound danced across the air. Birds cried, winds whispered, children laughed. The world was no longer mute. It was alive. But peace did not come easily. From the mountain ruins behind them, faint pulses of blue light began to flicker once more. The Keeper's main core had been shattered, but fragments of its code still stirred in the soil. Machines buried deep underground twitched to life, their sensors burning with cold mechanical hate. The silence wanted to return. Lyra stood on a cliff beside Eli, her hair blowing in the new wind. She listened to the hum of her people rebuilding in the distance. Villagers sang, their unfamiliar voices clumsy but full of joy. She smiled until the ground trembled again. The sound this time wasn't natural. It was metallic, angry. From beneath the valley floor, enormous drones began to rise, spider-like machines of steel and light, their eyes glowing blue. Hundreds of them. They crawled out of fissures spreading across the fields. The Keeper's fragmented consciousness had woken up and was fighting back. Lyra froze, terror flashing in her eyes. Then she heard something faint, Eli's hand tapping her shoulder. When she turned, he pointed toward the mountain's broken core still smoldering in the distance. His expression was calm, determined. Though he could no longer speak, his eyes told her exactly what he was saying. We end it today. She nodded, swallowing her fear. Together, she whispered. Eli scavenged through his equipment bag and pulled out a handful of EMP charges, devices meant for mining, not war. He gestured toward the drones and began setting them up around the cliff. Lyra helped, her movements clumsy but fast. Each click, each snap of metal into place was another defiance of silence. Below, the drones began firing beams of blue energy into the air. The sound of crackling electricity filled the valley as villagers screamed and scattered. The Keeper's broken voice echoed through the comms towers that had once been silent monuments. You cannot restore chaos. Silence must prevail. Lyra clenched her fists. You're wrong, she shouted toward the sky, her voice trembling but strong. Silence isn't peace, it's a cage. The drones turned toward her voice, sensors locking in. Dozens of beams fired at once. Eli tackled her out of the way, the ground exploding where they'd stood. Shards of crystal soil sliced across his arm, but he didn't slow down. He motioned for her to keep shouting. She understood. Her voice was the one thing the Keeper couldn't control anymore. It feared it. Standing on a rock ledge, Lyra raised her chin and screamed. The sound carried across the valley, amplified by the mountains themselves. Her words weren't just speech, they were power. They resonated with the fragments of freed energy left behind by the broken cube. The air around her vibrated, the drones faltered. Some of them froze mid-air, their systems overloaded by the frequency of her voice. Others turned and fired at random, confused by the interference. Eli rushed from charge to charge, activating each device with a silent precision only a human engineer could manage. His hands moved fast, steady, fearless. The last bomb flickered red, armed. He gave Lyra a sharp signal. She nodded and took a deep breath. Keeper, she shouted, her voice ringing like thunder. Your silence ends here. The charges detonated one by one. Brilliant waves of light tore through the sky, collapsing the drones and shredding the remaining circuitry buried beneath the valley. The mountain rumbled as fire and light consumed what was left of the Keeper's memory. When the last explosion faded, all that remained was wind and song. Lyra fell to her knees, breathing hard, her throat raw from shouting. Eli staggered beside her, covered in dust and blood, but smiling. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. We did it, she whispered. They can never take our voices again. He reached out and tapped the pendant still glowing on her neck, the same one she had given him. Then he pointed toward the sky. Above them the clouds parted, and sunlight poured through, warm, golden, and alive with the faint echo of countless voices carried on the wind. The people of Velura 9 gathered around, raising their hands and singing. It wasn't perfect. Their words stumbled. Their notes cracked. But the melody was pure, the sound of freedom. Lyra looked at Eli, her voice shaking with emotion. You gave us this world back, she said softly. Now it's time for us to speak for you. He smiled, the corners of his eyes glistening. The human had no voice left, but his silence had become something greater, an unending song carried by those who could now speak. And as the valley filled with life, Eli looked toward the twin suns and thought, though no one could hear it, if this is the price of freedom, I'd trade my voice 1,000 times again. The sun rose over Velura 9 in twin gold arcs, painting the crystal valleys in fire and light. The air no longer sat heavy with silence, it moved, alive with the soft sound of wind, the hum of insects, and the laughter of children rediscovering their own voices. Eli Ward stood at the edge of the rebuilt village, his hands resting on a damaged railing made from old ship parts. His throat still bore the faint silver scar left by the keeper's tendrils. He couldn't speak. He hadn't made a single sound since that day in the mountain, but he didn't need to. He watched the people of Velura 9 gather in the clearing below. They were different now, stronger, louder, free. Songs filled the air, melodies simple and rough but full of life. The same world that once punished sound now celebrated it. Each voice that rose was a rebellion against centuries of fear, and at the center of it all stood Lyra. She wore a woven mantle made from silver threads that shimmered like moonlight, a gift from her people. The spiral pendant glowed at her chest, pulsing softly to her heartbeat. When she saw Eli watching, she smiled, the same shy, warm smile she'd shown him the day they met by the stream. Lyra walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the glassy soil. Yet the world seemed to sing with every step she took. She stopped before him, her eyes bright with tears that weren't of sorrow but of gratitude. Eli, she said softly, her voice still slightly unsure but growing stronger with each word. I have waited to say this, with your gift. He tilted his head, curious. She took a deep breath. The crowd behind her went still. The wind slowed as if the entire planet was listening. Thank you, she whispered. It was 2 simple words, but they carried the weight of a world. Eli blinked, his chest tightening. He couldn't reply, but his eyes glistened as he smiled. He placed a hand over his heart, then pointed to her. It was his way of saying you're welcome. Though she didn't need the gesture to understand, Lyra stepped closer. Do you know what your silence became? She said softly. It became our voice. She looked back at the people gathered in the valley. Every sound you hear now, every word, every song, it exists because of you. He shook his head, signing quickly with his fingers. It exists because of you. She laughed, a bright, musical laugh that echoed across the valley. Then we'll say it was both of us. For a long while, they simply stood there watching the sunrise. The Keeper's Mountain had become nothing but stone and ash, its metal veins reclaimed by glowing plants. What once imprisoned voices now nourished new life. The elders approached, their faces lined but smiling. One of them spoke in a language Eli couldn't understand, but Lyra translated quietly beside him. They say the silence is gone forever. They want to honor you as the giver of sound. Eli chuckled silently, shaking his head. Just Eli, he signed. Lyra nodded, her expression soft. Then just Eli it is. That night, a celebration filled the valley. Fires burned bright beneath the stars and music, real music, rose into the sky. Drums made from crystal shells boomed like thunder. Children danced barefoot on the soil that had once been cursed to stillness. The sound carried far, echoing through canyons and mountains, spreading to every corner of Velura 9. Lyra sang. Her voice, once taken from her, now flowed like water, clear, gentle, and filled with power. The song was simple, a melody of gratitude and memory. But when she sang Eli's name, it echoed differently. It was more than sound. It was the world remembering. He watched her from the edge of the firelight, the warmth flickering across his face. He couldn't join the singing, but he felt every word. His heart beat in rhythm with the drums, in rhythm with the life he'd helped restore. When the night faded and the stars dimmed, Lyra found him sitting near the edge of the stream, the same place where they had first met. She sat beside him quietly, their reflections rippling in the glowing water. Do you ever wish you could have it back? She asked gently. He wrote on his wrist device, his handwriting glowing in soft blue letters. No. I gave up my voice, but I gained a world that can speak. Lyra smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. Then maybe your voice isn't gone at all, she whispered. Maybe it just changed form. Eli looked at her, puzzled. She placed her hand over her heart. Every time someone says your name, every time a child laughs, every time I sing, it's your voice. You didn't lose it, Eli. You just gave it to all of us." The wind stirred gently through the valley, carrying the faint sound of laughter and song, and somewhere within it, if one listened closely, was the faintest echo of a man's voice, soft and eternal. Not gone. Just shared, and as Lyra whispered one last time, her words melted into the night air. "Thank you, Eli Ward." The man who traded silence for life. The stars above shimmered in agreement, and Velura 9 once the silent world sang on.